which means it's Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Election Subcommittee.
Is it on?
Wait,
It's on.
It on, yeah, it's on, I'm pretty sure. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I'm sorry I didn't give anyone fair warning, but with Chairman Hood, would you mind just giving us a quick word of thanks before we get started?
Certainly. Thank you. Let's pray. Thank you, Lord, for this day. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and we pray for your wisdom as we make decisions that will impact this state and the people in this state. We just pray for clarity, wisdom, and grace as we go through these measures. We thank you and we love you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Chairman. All right, we've got just a few bills here on the agenda, and I think we'll start with Senator Burns up on Senate Bill 222. If you don't mind, we got mic on at the podium for you, Senator.
Let me get this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. Today I bring you Senate Bill 222. It is a single issue bill. It is designed to clarify the intent of SB 202. So if you look with me at the bill, it is designed to prohibit third-party funding of elections in Georgia. That was the intent of SB 202. So I'll quickly just point out two or three quick things. In Section 1, we basically define who can represent the government, the person, the potential individual who wants to make a contribution. I want to point out, this does not prohibit third parties from providing funds for Georgia elections, but it requires those funds to go through the Secretary of State's office, through the state of Georgia. So if you look with me, please, you will notice that online, I've got to pull my glasses. You look with me on line 25. All costs and expenses related to conducting primaries, elections, runoffs, and other undertakings authorized or required by this chapter shall be paid for from lawfully appropriated public funds. That's a key component of this bill. You'll notice that it prohibits officials from either accepting or taking contributions. So if you look in line 33, any county or municipal government employee, or election official who has taken, that's the one that requires the refunding. Line 28, no county or municipal government employee, or election official shall solicit, take, or otherwise accept from any person a contribution, donation, service, or anything else of value for the purpose of conducting primaries or elections in supporting the performing of his or her duties. And in the lines 33 through 37, it deals with refunding any funds that may have been inappropriately received. It does provide in sections 39 through 41 for certain nominal support of elections, so services that are provided by individuals without remunerations for goods of less than $200, or for the use of locations. There is a very stiff penalty associated with violating this provision. You'll see that in lines 42 through 44. So it is a felony. If you break Georgia law, you should be held accountable. And then in sections 2 and sections 3 basically enumerate one for the superintendent of county and municipalities. This is 49 through 52. Again, no superintendent, county, or municipality shall take or accept grants or gifts for purposes of administering this chapter from any source other than the state of Georgia or the federal government. And then Section 3 is the same language but for registrars. So, in a nutshell, this bill is intended to ensure that Georgia elections are funded from lawfully appropriated state or local funds. Again, it does not prohibit any entity from supporting Georgia elections, but they would have to go through the state of Georgia and through the state election board and through the Secretary of State's office. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Chairman Burns. I think you have a question, Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so your bill says that any funds that have been received this year, when this law goes into effect, they have to be returned within 14 days. If counties have already allocated these funds and made election plans around these funds, because many have municipal elections coming up as well, is the state going to make up the lost funding for these counties?
I cannot speak for the state. I would suggest that if any county received unlawful funds, this bill requires that they return them within 14 days.
Okay, and is there any, do we have any insight into how the funds will be distributed from the Secretary of State, if you're saying that he has to allocate all the funds?
The State Election Board in SB 202 was required to develop a process for accepting and distributing funds. I have a copy of that report in my folder. It is available, and I've had conversations with both the State Election Board and the Secretary of State so that they're prepared to accept funds in support of Georgia elections, but it has to be through the state and then distributed appropriately so that selective communities aren't singled out to receive funds and others are neglected.
Okay.
I'll be happy to share a copy of that State Election Board report with you.
Thank you, Representative Roberts. Representative Lallier.
Thank you, Chairman. And Senator, appreciate you presenting this bill out to the committee. We've spent many weeks in this committee discussing how overworked and under-resourced our local election officials are. And so I'm still trying to put my finger on the intent behind this bill, Senator, and what we're trying to solve and fix. If we've already established that election officers in our municipalities, these elections are getting more expensive. Our everyday volunteers, I'm thinking of play grandmas and mothers of mine who volunteer their time and sacrifice time away from their families to support our elections. We're talking about putting them in jail for a year, a grandmother in jail for a year, and fining them $10,000. It just doesn't seem commensurate with submitting a grant application for additional resources. So for me, it should be left up to those municipalities to lift and choose that option if they see fit. And to Representative Roberts' point, there are 159 counties across the state, and we're adding bureaucracy, unneeded bureaucracy to I run a nonprofit. If I have to go to the state to submit a grant to receive funds that my community, my kids need, does that help or hurt my cause? And so there are a number of issues that I see in this bill. I'd love to hear from you. What are we trying to solve? What's the intent behind this bill to add more bureaucracy, to penalize everyday workers by putting them in jail and fining them $10,000 for just trying to bring more resources to their community to enhance the voter experience and to protect voter integrity?
I thank you for the question. I appreciate your interest. Let me say, first of all, the intent of this legislation is to clarify the SB 202 language that said that all funds should come from counties, states, and municipalities. What happened subsequently to that is a county received a large grant, and it was an individual county that the other 158 counties did not enjoy that opportunity. So the challenge we have is clarification, and I'd point you carefully to section 21-2-18C, lines 39 through 41. This code section shall not apply to the donation or use of locations for voting purposes, for services provided by individuals without remuneration, or goods that have nominal value of less than $200. So we're not after grandma, all right? And we're not interested in finding grandma or putting grandma in prison for anything because we appreciate her help and her support. What we're trying to do is make sure that every county in Georgia has the same opportunity to receive resources without outside influence. So the basic intent of this bill is to ensure that all elections are fairly conducted and that each community has an opportunity to receive funds through the state of Georgia.
Senator, so currently you're saying that every county does not have the same opportunity to pursue those additional resources?
What I'm suggesting, Representative, is that certain funding sources only provide resources to certain counties. They don't offer those resources to some of my counties. They don't offer them to Glasscock County or Warren County or Tolliver County. So there's a lot of counties out there that are small and struggling, as you point out.
Yes, sir.
But this seems to be going to larger metropolitan counties where the third party has a vested interest in that community's voting.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Lallier. Representative Maynor. You keep cutting me out. You keep cutting yourself
I
off.
know,
There we
I'm
go.
sorry. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Senator Burns. Quick question, 2 questions really, if you don't mind.
Certainly.
For lines 25 through 27,
Okay.
the way I'm reading this is basically we are trying not to privatize elections.
I think that's a fair statement. Thank you, Representative.
And for lines 36 through 38, I do have concerns for backdating something. I would, like a friendly amendment to say we can't backdate something. I think it would just be too difficult for counties or cities to go back and give funds within 14 days of this bill being signed. That seems like a heavy lift. And for lines 42 through 44.
Can I address that before we move to
Absolutely.
another issue? Let's look carefully at lines 33 through 38. The intent of this legislation, again, is to clarify what was already in code. It's just that some communities chose to misinterpret that code and may have accepted funds that were not appropriate. So this is not backdating. It's simply acknowledging the fact that the funds that might have been received were inappropriate and must be returned in 14 days. Now, the burden is on the community who accepted the funds inappropriately. It's not on the state of Georgia.
And a follow-up question. So you're
Sure.
saying for 33, that section 33 and
through
below,
38, right.
and SB 202, this was already outlined.
SB 202 required that all funding be come from lawfully provided sources. It allowed the county to provide the source, which is the way that funding is normally provided for elections, from counties. What happened in a particular case is the county solicited and received third-party funds and then inappropriately chose to accept them and then inappropriately allocate them. It's time for those funds to be returned.
So follow-up question to that, if I may,
Sure.
is so for the county that did that, does SB 202 already make that unlawful, and so this piece is not needed because it's already unlawful, or has it been taken to court?
It is not. I'm not aware of the legal challenge, but the point is, SB 202 prohibited third-party funding. SB 222 clarifies that very, very specifically, and it makes it a felony to violate that code. If you trace my work in elections and election integrity, you will hopefully recall that I only have 3 requirements or 3 tenets, and one is every legal vote counts. Number 1, every legal vote counts, period. Number 2, every county, 159 of them, follow Georgia law. Well, I would suggest to you that the vast majority have followed Georgia law. We might have had an outlier here and there. every county follows Georgia law. Number 3, you have confidence that your vote counts, and I have confidence that mine counts, so that we have confidence in our elections. So the intent of SB 202 and the intent of SB 222 is to ensure that every county follows Georgia law.
And one last question, if I may, Chair. You could potentially have my vote on this. I understand that, I agree with you that if we're doing something with the elections and someone's vote, that is a serious crime. We have things on the books right now, violations and things that happen to women where it's not even a felon. So, you know, to make accepting a grant a felony when we don't have assault charges that are felons is just kind of hard to navigate. If you would be willing to even make that not so arduous, you know, the prison systems are already overwhelmed, I think, throughout the state. And so this is an undue burden, I think, to make it a felony.
I appreciate the representative's position, and I concur. There are any number of challenges in our code system that perhaps are not as equitable as they should be. The intent of the language on lines 42 through 44 is to ensure that every county follows Georgia law, to make sure that they understand it's a serious offense if you violate election law, and that we want you to follow the law consistently. So while I appreciate and understand your concerns about the issue of a felony and the fine, I would ask the committee to consider the legislation as it has been presented.
Any further follow-up, Representative Maynard?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Representative Gullett.
Thank you, Senator. I feel like I'm pretty familiar with this. One, I used to serve on election board. And then 2, HB 62 from 2 years ago was my bill that was related to no outside funding.
Right.
It kind of got migrated into SB 202. And I think, you know, in my belief of the government should be small. But one of the things that government absolutely should fund is our elections. And it shouldn't come from outside funding sources. And so I'm wholeheartedly supportive of this bill. I think that what we're trying to do, or what you're trying to do, and what I agree with you doing, is making elections be funded by the government, and that's the only way you really keep outside influences outside of the operational aspects of the elections. And you know, plenty of us candidates get funded outside of government, and that's where the difference is. But this is the operational aspect of elections, and it should be funded by the government. So thank you for bringing the bill. I look forward to supporting it.
Thank you. I appreciate the House. As if you've been around the process for the last several years, you realize that much of the language in SB 202 was language that was crafted and perfected in the House, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the support that the House has given that legislation, and I would appreciate your support for this clarification.
Any follow-up, Representative Gullett? No, sir. Thank you, sir. All right, I believe Representative Bazemore was pressing her buttons for some time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes. Thank you for your presentation, and some of what I wanted to ask has already been asked and you have addressed. But one question, well, a couple questions I have. Why is this money's going to be evenly distributed, and how long is it going to take for someone requesting to receive that grant? Is it going to be in a timely manner?
I thank you for the question, and I concur with you. I hope it's appropriately distributed based upon the State Election Board's guidelines. I would have to defer to the Secretary of State as far as the operationalization of that, but I want to make sure the committee understands this bill does not in any way limit outside support for Georgia elections. It requires that support go through the State Election Board guidelines and via the Secretary of State. So it's coming from the state of Georgia. And by the way, that's it's not an unusual process. We do those types of things now. This would simply add resources to the Secretary of State's ability to support local election boards.
So a follow-up, if you don't mind. So would you say that, because I heard you say earlier that one county got more than the other county?
Perhaps one county got one grant and 158 got nothing.
So would you say that the size of the county is going to determine how much they receive, and it still might be the same?
I
One
would
would
say
get-
the state election board would have to determine how best to distribute those funds. I would suggest to you that a small county and a large county, the voters in those communities are equal. They have equal voting rights and equal voting opportunities. I think the problem we're addressing here is the inequality of certain communities having additional resources that are not available to other counties across the state.
And another follow-up, as of this date,
Yes.
was there only one county that was in violation?
To my knowledge, that is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bazemore. And my understanding, Mr. Chairman, is one of the goals of the bill is I guess equality in a sense, but also just uniformity throughout the state. That
we want-
somebody in Rennes has the same opportunities at voting as someone in Fulton, and someone in
Someone
Hall
in
County has the
Decatur would have the same opportunity as someone in Hayhira. And that has not appeared to be the case, although that was the intent of SB 202.
same. Thank you. Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator, I am looking at SB 202.
Okay.
And it says, no superintendent shall take or accept any funding, grants, or gifts from any source other than from the governing authority of the county or municipality, the state of Georgia, or the federal government. So I'm a lawyer, and the way I read that is you've been saying that this was unlawful or inappropriate. According to that, a county filing for a grant would not fall under what I just read. And then I just want to follow up. No county's election needs are the same. There's no way. We have large counties in the metro area, and then there's small counties. Small counties are going to need less than the large counties. Right now, under our law, the counties have a responsibility to fund elections. And under what you're doing, the state has no duty to do that. So all funding has to run through them, and the counties have no guarantee that that funding is going to get to them and is going to be adequate to fund their needs for their population, their voting population, all of the things that come with being a large county versus a small county. So I just am at a loss. We are putting all of these unfunded mandates on counties left and right. We have numbers to show what their budgets have increased as a result of HB 316, SB 202. And so now we're saying just because one county was innovative enough to go and apply for a grant to fund, they're not conducting, the superintendent is conducting it. The county just went and got the money to help pay for it, which is their responsibility. So I'm just at a loss as to how, and then to make it a felony, So I'm objecting to the representation that it was inappropriate or unlawful at the time.
I appreciate the representative's position. I would suggest that the superintendents were not allowed to receive funding, but a particular community chose to take a third-party fund and then directly allocate it to the superintendent to circumvent the intent of SB 202. That's the challenge that I have. That's why this bill is clarified. I'd like to point out that small counties have election requirements just as similar as large counties. I have large counties. I have Columbia County, I have Richmond County, and I have a lot of small counties. The reality is that the local community is responsible for conducting their elections, and that has traditionally been the funding source. The local revenue, the local county commission is the responsible party. The state's role is to complement that and to supplement that, and to do it in a reasonable and fair and unbiased way so that every county has access to those funds. What has appeared to happen is that third parties have selected certain areas to provide funding and ignored others. What we're trying to do with this bill is to ensure that every county has an equal opportunity to receive that resources. And I'd point out that for all of the naysayers in SB 202, we had the largest participation of any election in our state in 2022. We had the highest amount of satisfaction associated with that election. We had the shortest wait times. So while not perfect, we acknowledge that. The results of SB 202 have been a positive thing for Georgia, and I'm happy to have had a small part in it.
Any follow-up, Representative Roberts? I don't mean to cut you off. Okay, all right. Chairman Powell, been patiently waiting over there in the corner.
Thank you, my friend. Senator, I appreciate your bill, since I was a little bit involved in into that committee at that time, the 202. Could you tell me right now, if there may be somebody from the elections board here, Secretary of State's office, but the purpose of what we did in that handiwork in 202 was to stop any outside money from coming in that could directly influence an election on a county-by-county basis. And the language that we put in, that it went to the Secretary of State's office to be distributed. Could you tell me, or have you talked to them about how that's working out for them right now?
They are here, and they can probably speak to that, Mr. Chairman, but I want to acknowledge Chairman Powell's work in elections legislation over the last several years. And much of what's in SB 202 is because of members of this committee. I would say that the Secretary of State's office has been extremely supportive and cooperative as we work through this process. They are prepared to receive and disperse funds from third parties. If any third party chooses to support elections in Georgia, we welcome that. But I would defer to the Secretary of State's office to give you the details on how that's working. I would suggest to you that if individual counties go out and solicit and receive independent funds, perhaps to influence election outcomes, that negates the potential funding for all counties in Georgia to receive resources.
My friend, as I understand, the purpose of your legislation is to clarify.
Absolutely.
Sometimes we need to do clarification. In this business of the elections, what we saw in the 18 elections and the 16 and the 20 elections and all of that, a lot of us realized at that time one of the biggest problems we had was a lack of uniformity on a county-by-county basis. We had some counties that just stretched the rules to the limit if it wasn't put in code. And we saw at that point it needs to be codified, and we're still seeing things that need to be codified. So that being said, has there been any jurisdiction that has stepped outside of the boundaries or the change of interpretation of what the written law was?
There appears to be one county that has solicited and accepted funds for their elections, local elections in the county, at the neglect of the other 158 counties in our state. Now, there may have been more than one, but I'm aware of one. And as the chairman points out, sometimes we need to clarify. Oftentimes, the original language was subject to interpretation, and that interpretation was not consistent with the intent. So this bill is designed to clarify that third-party funding is prohibited for Georgia elections, except where it goes through the state or through the federal government.
Well, I certainly respect the protocol that you senators have. You haven't called the name of that county. But if I might ask the question, does it appear that this was just a mistake, a lack of understanding of the law, or what might have prompted this?
I would suggest it was a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation of the law. I would certainly anticipate that it was not an intentional rejection of the law, but the fact that they felt that the law would allow this. This is an opportunity to clarify the fact that it is not acceptable.
So as in a situation of a lot of things that we do, we have to sometimes come back with more clarification so that there's no more misinterpretations.
You are correct, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Powell. I believe Representative Bazemore is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator, first and foremost, I want to go on record saying, agreeing with my colleague, that I don't agree with the date going backwards. As a rule here, we normally set a date going forward or present. So that's going to cause a lot of pain and confusion. And especially since you said it's only one county. I don't understand why we're penalizing that county to this degree. The other thing is, I have a question. Have you spoken to any of the county elected officials?
I've spoken to any number of county elected officials, including the county in question, perhaps. I would acknowledge it is today is March the 13th. March the 13th. January, is that right? 14th. There you go. I missed a day. Yesterday was the 13th. Today is the 14th. I got one more day. How many days? How many? That's a hard day. How many days has there been since January the 1st? And the answer is we're less than 90 days. So this is something that should never have happened. But the fact that it did happen, it's time to perhaps correct that.
Thank you. Follow up, please.
Yes, ma'am.
And have you spoken to the county commissioners who set the budget and the funding for these counties?
I've had conversations with any number of county commissioners. I have not had conversations with this particular county. To my knowledge, they've not reached out to have a discussion. I'm happy to do that.
So across the state, how many would you say that you've spoken to?
Over the last 3 years, dozens and dozens. And I would suggest that in all cases, perhaps with this limited exception, they all understood the intent, and they did not in any way attempt to accept or request third-party funding.
So none of them expressed the impact this would have going forward?
I don't see an impact. Again, if you follow Georgia law, there is no impact.
The commissioner's saying that this will adversely impact them. That was the question. They have not expressed that at all.
I think that when SB 202 was adopted, they understood the intent of SB 202 and they accepted their responsibility to lawfully fund their local elections.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bazemore. Representative Valalier.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sitting back listening to the conversation, and I can say this. I agree with you, Senator, and I know my friend Chairman Powell alluded to clarity and the value of clarity. It's hard for me to think of this as a move to provide uniformity when we can clearly establish that a county with a few thousand folks versus a county with 1 million folks have very different and unique needs. And but that's neither here nor there. I understand and respect your position, sir. I'd like to, Chair, when the time is right, if the committee sees fit and our good friend Senator Burns is open, to bring a friendly amendment around lines 42 through 44. It's just, I know Representative Maynor mentioned this, Representative Roberts touched on this, Rep. Bazemore as well. A year in jail and a $10,000 fine seems incredibly excessive. And if you see fit, sir, I understand you're wanting to have some teeth in this bill to tamp down on further activity, but from how I see it, it should be no more than a misdemeanor and no more than $1,000 fine. Prison should not even be in the discussion. But Chair, I defer to you on that.
Well, we'll get to amendment. We've got 17 people who want to speak to this bill. So when we get to the point of moving on the bill and amending it at about 4:30 this morning, we'll certainly be glad to entertain that. Right now, I've got just a couple more questions. Representative Roberts.
Okay. First of all, I've done a little research on the grant that was received. It was from the U.S. Alliance for Election Excellence, launched in 2022, and is a 5-year, $80 million nonpartisan program that brings together election officials, designers, technologists, and other experts to envision, support, and celebrate excellence in U.S. election administration. So, not sure how someone applying for a county applying for a grant that is offered by a nonpartisan group. And regardless, one thing that I, as a lawyer, and we have other lawyers on both sides of the aisle here, I hate it when we pass laws that you can see on its face it's going to be legally challenged. You admitted that it was a misunderstanding, so it was not unlawful. Subsection D, is ex post facto law. It's on its face illegal. You cannot retroactively apply something backwards. And so you're about to pass a bill that we know will be legally challenged, which in my humble opinion is a waste of taxpayer dollars. Not to mention the taxpayer dollars that are going to have to make up for the $1.5 million that is going to have to be refunded. I don't know. So I would ask that we remove the section that on its face is illegal from the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Roberts. I don't know, Senator, did you want to respond?
I'll just respond by saying I'm not an attorney, and that's not a bad thing.
Source of pride to your mother, I'm
Source
sure.
of pride my mother has, that's right. But I would also say that I've had this bill vetted by any number of what I consider very competent and capable election attorneys, and the objective here is to clarify Georgia law. The law was in place. It was perhaps misinterpreted, but the reality is they have to refund funds that were inappropriately received. I would also challenge the representative's assertion that this was a nonprofit. I don't challenge that, but a nonpartisan nonprofit, and that they selectively allow communities to receive grants where there might be political advantage, and I find that to be unacceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any other questions for the sponsor? All right, I see that you have none. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to try to go through this list here. If you'll please keep your comments to just about 2 minutes. I know that's somewhat grotesque, but I think everybody wants to get out of here before dinner time. Cindy Battles, People's Agenda. There she is. I didn't see you behind the column over there. You were hiding from me.
It's always good to not be on camera when my face makes expressions that I don't mean for it to. Sometimes I say things out loud without speaking. My name is Cindy Battles. I am the Policy and Engagement Director for the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. First of all, I'm going to say that when we were talking about 202, we kind of mentioned that some of the language was vague and that we were going to run into problems, and I think that's what you have here. The wording of SB 202 actually lets the county in question do exactly what it did. But one of the things that I want to talk about a little bit is I have sent each and every one of y'all a list of the county, the cost to counties. And the sponsor of the bill just said it is the responsibility of the county to come up with the money to run those elections. So my question is, how exactly have y'all decided the right way for them to do that is? Are they supposed to fine people? Are they supposed to over-police communities to raise funds? We keep talking about the Zuckerberg grants, but Arnold Schwarzenegger did the same thing. And not just in metro counties, but small counties as well. During 202, smaller counties, including smaller counties in South Georgia, came to hearings and said, hey, this enabled us to run our elections. Please don't take this away from us. So strengthening the language is just once more impacting them. I've also got quotes from county election supervisors for the same stuff that I sent y'all. If anybody's interested in that, I'm happy to give it to you. Because even in SB 202, the way that we have defined how they have to print something in the newspaper has increased their cost because a larger font costs more. And the state continues not to appropriate funds to run elections. Here's what I'm going to ask. I'm going to keep this really brief. I have a whole bunch of stuff, especially because I've heard a whole bunch of wrong stuff, including the fact that the Secretary of State's already understaffed, and now you're asking them to run a grant program. If you've been a nonprofit person before, that's a lot of work. Here's what I am going to sincerely ask y'all to do, because what y'all keep doing, or what we keep doing, is passing these unfunded mandates and saying, here's a problem, and offering no solution. I am going to respectfully ask y'all to table this bill until you can come back and say, hey, you're not allowed to do it this way, but because we understand crumbling infrastructure and we have committed ourselves to running safe and secure elections, and we have committed ourselves to making sure that every legal voter can cast a vote and they don't have to stand in line 8 hours to do it. Here is our solution to this problem. Here's how we're going to fund elections in Georgia. Here's how we're going to enable you to fund elections in Georgia. Because that's part of my job. As a policy director, I'm supposed to go to my boss and say, here's a problem and here are the proposed solutions. I'm going to ask y'all to do the same thing for the people in Georgia, including the voters and the election supervisors. Here's the problem. Here's what we had to do, but here is the solution so that all elections are funded and counties can run them safely and securely the way that we have pledged to the people that they will be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Tamara Favorito. And just, you've testified, and like Ms. Battles, just state your name for the record and then go.
Thank you. I'm Tamara Favorito, and I'm here on behalf of Voters Organized for Trusted Election Results in Georgia, often called Voter GA. We've led the nonpartisan election integrity movement here in Georgia for 17 years. We have over 20,000 followers, and we strongly support this bill. History shows us how private money is given with partisan strings attached to influence the outcome of an election. It has no business in any election. Last year, we proposed to close the SB 202 loophole that allows counties to accept indirect money, but our changes were not adopted in HB 1464 or other legislation. This year, as counties began exploiting that loophole, SB 222 became necessary. But there is a SB 222 loophole that we'd like to have corrected today. And that loophole allows the state officials or agencies to accept the same private money banned to counties. If the state or the Secretary of State accepts private money to allocate to county election offices, it's really no different than the counties accepting it directly. So we ask for a friendly amendment to ban the state officials and agencies from receiving private money for future elections as well. Now, Legislative Council may have a better way to do this, but we think all that's needed is simple one-word changes to add the word state in lines 18 and 28 in front of the word county. And you should have before you today, every committee member should have a letter explaining this and showing the change explicitly. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions of this witness? Oh, we got Representative Lallier.
Thank you, Chair. Hey,
Hey.
good afternoon. I'm looking at a list of counties that received third-party funds to assist in their elections. I see Democratic counties. I see Cherokee, $750K. We talked about DeKalb earlier. Forsyth received $800,000. Houston County received almost $500,000. Paulding, almost $400,000. This isn't a partisan issue. You have Republican and Democratic counties receiving additional assistance to enhance the voter experience and to protect voter integrity. And so I wanted to ask you, given that both Republican and Democratic counties receive third-party funds, does that make it partisan?
What they were asked to do had partisan issues, and Garland will talk specifically to that. But we believe that even if the Secretary of State took the grant and appropriated it to every county equally, we should still not be taking private money with strings attached. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Favorito. Is it Janelle Clodfelter? Okay, good. How you doing?
Mr. O'Lallier, I'm going to say your name again because I just want to give you this piece of information. About 94% of that money went to Democrat areas. So that the distribution of it.
Which year?
In 2020.
2020.
Yeah. Okay, good afternoon. I am Janelle Clodfelter speaking in support of 222 with one tiny addition, and that is, as Ms. Favorito said, the word state in front of county. I've not been privy to what the State Election Board has written up as to how the money would be distributed, so I'm going to stay with my stance here. While the majority of government entities who have previously received cash for elections from wealthy influencers, and it is covered in this bill, the loophole that remains will assure that the state is the sole benefactor of large sums of money, and they will have carte blanche in distribution of these funds. It's a scary thought for me. In previously heard March testimony, one county stated they were being required to buy new scanners and poll pads to the tune of $1.5 million, which was a huge burden on their county. Legislators must realize the solution is not a redistribution of private money to help only selected counties. If the system in Georgia is too expensive for counties, then the system needs to be changed to help counties remain within their budget. Even elections must live within their means. Governor Kemp just presented in the 2023 State of the State Address, Georgia had an unprecedented year of economic success. Surely that means we can afford our elections. Georgia elections are not registered as a charity with the Secretary of State and should never be treated as such. A $2 million giveaway will never be viewed by the citizens of Georgia as a something-for-nothing giveaway. I walked by numerous people with no home to make my way into this Gold Dome. If California has a desire to donate to a charity, I would recommend donating food for the homeless in both Georgia and California. Georgia needs to pay for her own elections, or our vote is not secure from outside influence, and the election will prove unfair. And I would also like to add, the money that is given to this election excellence group has been provided by Mark Zuckerberg, and I'm quite sure that he's not nonpartisan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Favorito, come on up, but if you'll hold on 1 second, I want to recognize Chairman Anderson for an announcement concerning state and local government subcommittee.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry the light wasn't coming on this end, so I wasn't sure if I was on or not. I know some of the people in the audience here are for our 2 o'clock state and local government subcommittee meeting. We've had some sidebar discussion up here. I'm not just running around like a jackrabbit today. This is an important matter. We've got this bill to finish up and still one more elections bill. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make an announcement that we're going to postpone the state and local subcommittee meeting till tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. in this room. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'm sorry to intrude on your time yet again. I seem to have a habit of doing that. I'm very sorry. Mr. Favorito, if you'll go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to address Representative Olalie's question about what problem does this bill solve, and isn't this nonpartisan? I submitted a document for the committee about Capital Research Center report, and it defined how the $45 million of CTCL money was used in 2020. It was distributed disproportionately to the counties in violation of equal protection clauses in the Georgia and the United States Constitution. Secretary of State's office didn't object to that. The 94% of that money, the CTCL money, according to the report from Capital Research, went to counties won by President Biden. The 10 largest grants also went to counties won by President Biden. That increased voter turnout in those 10 counties, increased the turnout by 35% with a net gain of 510,000 votes for President Biden in an election that was decided allegedly by 11,779 votes. So that same organization, CTCL, also funds the U.S. Alliance for Election Excellence. These are highly partisan organizations, and the track record of their money shows that it's all partisan. So the bottom line is that private money is in fact partisan, and private money should also be banned to the states. And that's why I will also support what we think is a friendly amendment. We hope Chairman Burns will think it's friendly, to also add the word state in lines 18 and 28 so that it bans the money to the state as well as banning it to the counties. So we consider that friendly. And also I will leave you a summary of that report as well for the record, Mr. Chairman, of the Capital Research Project report.
Thank you very much. Any questions of Mr. Favorito? Thank you so much, sir. Pamela, is it Reardon? Did I pronounce the last name correctly? Okay.
Good afternoon. I'm Pamela Reardon.
Good afternoon.
And I'm speaking for SB 222. And I was around when the House was mishmashing all the bills together in whatever that was, 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, I guess, I don't know. So at the time when these funds became available in 2020, I couldn't imagine that this was happening because, as Garland alluded to, it's against federal law. It's against federal law to election influence. It's against the law to pick winners and losers. And this is what this is doing because it's far from nonpartisan. If these counties want to save money, all they have to do is take the 3 weeks and combine it into 1 week of advanced voting. Just as an example, in the runoff recently in Cobb County, we had almost the same number of people voting, okay, in the 6 days in the runoff as we had in the whole 3 weeks. So if people wanted to come out and vote early voting, they voted in those 6 days. And I poll watched all the way through those elections, and there were many, many places and many, many days when we had a handful of people coming and voting in early voting. So that is a huge expense, and that can be fixed easily. So I just wanted to say that I'm for this because the private money has to stop because it's influencing elections. Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much. Is it Julie Adams?
Yes.
I don't mean to impugn your handwriting, it's just my eyes.
I make a funny J, sorry. So my name is Julie Adams, and I'm with Tea Party Patriots Action. So, you know, back in 2020 when CTCL gave $45 million to Georgia, the intent of it was because of COVID. It was for mailboxes outside. It was for getting more people to vote in that COVID era. And it was for, I believe it's PPE. Now, it's funny, 3 years later, I can't remember what that was, but for masks and gloves and hand sanitizer. So, you know, the thing about it is it's time. We don't need COVID money anymore. And the third-party money really needs to be banned from interfering with our elections. And I agree with some of our other speakers. I don't think even the state should take money and distribute it. We need to pay for that ourselves. I know that the counties and some of you here have an issue with the counties not having enough funding. I am also, like Pam before us, very involved in our elections and have been for many, many elections and been a state poll watcher. I think that for additional money to run our elections, we need to just shorten early voting, whether it's 5 days a week from Saturday through Wednesday, or whether it's 7 or 8 hours a day. These election workers are way overworked. It's very hard to recruit good people to work because I can't believe your grandmother can do it. In Fulton County, we have 19 days straight from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. God bless everybody that can do it. And so I think we need to be more realistic. We have so many ways to vote in Georgia, and I don't think that it would limit the voters that are coming out if we did it 5 days a week for, during that 19-day period, or cut the hours. I just think, that helps the elections departments be able to organize more, and it helps recruit good people. So I hope you guys vote for this bill. I think it's very necessary for free, fair, and transparent elections. And thank you for the time and listening to my comment.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Brad Carver.
Chairman, I'll keep my comments brief. Brad Carver, and I chair the Georgia GOP State Election Conference Task Force. We formed this task force back in January of 2021 and worked very extensively on Senate Bill 202. So we want to applaud the efforts, as you heard from Chairman Burns earlier. A lot of what ultimately got into Senate Bill 202 was from the hard work of your own election integrity committee, so we commend you for that. We support and are fully in support of Senate Bill 222. I do know that we have some differences of opinion here in terms of appropriations from the State Election Board. We have those differences of opinion even among our task force. We had election board members from majority blue counties and majority red counties, and so there is some differences out there. But I do think ultimately the intent of Senate Bill 202 was for that money to be flowing through the State Election Board proportionately to the counties. You've heard the statistics about how that money broke out from the 2020 election, and that is a dangerous influence on our elections. And so we urge you to pass this legislation. We think it's equal, and we think the issue of elections is very important, and being very careful about the power of private money in elections. And so we encourage you to do that. We also certainly hope that there's an opportunity to bring back the hard work that y'all did with House Bill 1464. A lot of members of this committee worked very hard on that last year. We know that died in the Senate, and there was a lot of good legislation that we supported, and we certainly hope during this legislative session that we have an opportunity to have that come back. A lot of that was contained in Senate Bill 221 that Chairman Burns also carried over in the Senate. But thank you for your hard work. We support you, and we appreciate you.
Thank you for your testimony. Trey Kelly.
Good afternoon. I'm Trey Kelly, immediate past chairman of the Fulton County Republican Party. I'd like to thank the chairman and the committee for your leadership on taking up these important issues. I am also in favor of 222 for the reasons echoed by the representative of not privatizing elections, and certainly agree with the intent of the bill in general. I would also like to encourage the committee to take up some issues that were in Senate Bill 221 that include some additional nonpartisan issues and common sense issues that include individuals. Republicans and Democrats move out of Georgia every day. They move in Georgia, get registered. They move out of Georgia, and they do not. In many cases, we have individuals that are registered in other states now, have filed homestead exemptions in other states. I mean, that we all know that goes on every day, but there's no mechanisms to try to help the county elections boards clarify and unification on how to address that. In addition to P.O. boxes, people registered at P.O. boxes, mailbox, etc., UPS stores. Nobody needs to be living in Destin, Florida, and being registered up here to vote. That also needs to be addressed. And then also, I think there should be something in there to help with homelessness. Individuals who are registered, homeless who are registered at various locations. I would encourage some thought into having them designated at a designated government entity, so that their vote is protected from being challenged if they're just registered at a random commercial address or anywhere else for that matter. So thank you for your time, and thank you for your hard work.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Is it Dale Lohman?
Good afternoon. It's Dayle Lohman Smith.
Dayle, sorry.
Thank you. And please pardon my shirt sleeves. I had to jump up from a meeting to get here and be with you all this afternoon.
That's quite all right. We're just all jealous because it gets hot in this room.
My name is Dayle Lohman Smith. I am the chair of the DeKalb County Board of Registration and Elections, which apparently is the board that shall not be named during this session this afternoon. And I am speaking in opposition to SB 222 on numerous grounds. You'll forgive all of the scribbled notes to correct many misstatements that I heard during some of the testimony today. I would first like to dispute vigorously the characterization that DeKalb County violated the law, either intentionally or unintentionally, by the county finance department pursuing grant funds to support the administration of elections in DeKalb County. The law is written as it is shown in SB 202, and just as the county pursues supplemental funding for all of the programs and operations that it administers, it did so in this case. In fact, I and many other election officials were in attendance at Gavrio in 2021 when this provision of SB 202 was characterized not as a prohibition on pursuing outside funding. Okay.
It was brought to my attention you're not allowed to record during committee meeting. No problem. Please continue, but you're going to run out of time. So
okay.
I know you got a lot to get to, but
okay.
Speed up a little bit.
It was not characterized to us as election officials as a prohibition on pursuing outside funding, but an additional level of accountability by having those funds go through the Board of Commissioners to be appropriated. And it was with that understanding that the county rightfully and under its typical process. I'm also a former assistant county manager for Fulton County for 5 years, so I'm very familiar with county budgets and how that is appropriated. I also want to take issue with the language in this bill called saying that we can only use lawfully appropriated public funds. If there was a clear understanding of what that meant, any funds that are given to a county that are then accepted by that county and then appropriated are lawfully appropriated public funds. That is how the process works. Many counties get money. We've gotten money from the Arthur Blank Foundation, from numerous foundations everywhere. Lots of millionaires. There seems to be one particular one that people don't like. Not that I'm a great big fan of Mark Zuckerberg myself, but there are many foundations that appropriate funds to county governments. Once a board of commissioners accepts those funds and then allocates them, they become lawfully appropriated public funds. Writing that in this law does not change that. And that's the problem with SB 202. It was not clear. This does nothing to clarify it. All it does is penalize already harassed and underpaid, or in my case, unpaid, elections officials and volunteers when they're, and I have to admit being offended by being told that by seeking to serve the voters of our county that we could risk being sent to prison when there are elected officials right now who actively sought to overturn the results of an election who are not facing one single charge. But we, in seeking to serve our citizens, are being threatened with a year in prison. I missed time with my child willfully to serve the public for no pay. This is offensive. It is poorly written. It is misinformed. At no point were we as elections officials consulted. I attended Mr. Burns's hearing in the Ethics Committee. We were not allowed to speak. We were not consulted. Nobody spoke with me or any of my colleagues who actually have knowledge of what it costs to run an election. To suggest that we cut off opportunities for people to exercise their right to participate in democracy in order to save some money is offensive, and it is anti-democratic. There are so many misstatements and errors that we heard. I wish that I could correct them all, but I will stop there and take a breath. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you for your testimony. Jennifer Lee.
Who live and work in our community, that we should do what we can to support the election workers who administer elections. SB 222 works against that, and so we oppose this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry we didn't have the audio working for the first part of your so thank you. Earl Ferguson.
Earl Ferguson, Fulton County voter. Speaking for myself, I'm in favor of the the two bills that are being considered, and also the addition of the 221. If I get them backwards, 221 and 222. Somebody said louder. Can you hear me? Okay.
We can hear you up here. I don't know.
I do want to add two comments. One, I've followed these contributions as they've come in, and invariably they come in with stipulations on how the funds should be used, and that should definitely not be permitted. And the other comment I would like to make is sort of off the cuff here. Senate Bill 189 is one of my favorite pieces of legislation that will basically do away with the QR codes and hadn't been considered. Don't leave it out of the considerations. Thank you very much. I have to go get to the car before the meter part runs out.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate that. Betsy Kramer.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I am Betsy Kramer, and I'm from Fulton County. I'm also a member of the Republican Election Task Force. I was a member of it prior to it actually being formed in 2021. I started in 19. I am a retired poll worker. I was a manager for over a decade, and I had to step away and just have never gotten back into it because the hours are horrendous. But anyway, I am in support of this House Bill or Senate Bill 222. I think it's important. I think there's 159 counties, and there needs to be equity between all of them. Smaller counties might not have the ability. I know for a fact grant writing is pretty hard. My sister does it for a living. And, a small county versus a big county like Gwinnett or Fulton have the funds. And I think there needs to be equity between all the money brought in from outside money. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Let's see. Ginger Bradshaw.
Hi, excuse me. I'm Ginger Bradshaw. I live in Fulton County. I'm a Fulton County poll manager. And I just do not believe, I'm surprised that a lot of you don't think, when people give philanthropic money, like the Arthur Blank, I don't know what he gives money for, but there are a lot of people that give philanthropic money, but I don't believe that people give money for elections that don't have a desired outcome or effect. And I think we need to outlaw all outside money for elections. If an election if a county can't pay for the elections, then possibly they could ask for something from the state. But they need to go to their county commission and raise their taxes or do whatever. But I also agree with someone who spoke earlier. I live behind one of the Fulton County libraries where they have early voting. The first day is busy, the last day is busy. And those 3 weeks in between is crickets. And you've got, I think there are like 10 or 12 people there being paid, and I'm old enough to remember when you could only get an absentee ballot if you were going to be out of town, if you were a certain age, if you were in the hospital. And I'm not opposed to absentee ballots. If you're going to be out of town, we're in a much more mobile world now. People travel, they work, and that sort of thing. But the absentee ballot, the mailbox is the drop box for the absentee ballot. But you could do an absentee ballot, this is not in front of your committee today, but if you make elections less expensive, then counties can afford them. And maybe send out a questionnaire to all your county managers. What can we do that would help your elections be less expensive, more successful, and really go to the people that are doing the job. Again, I'm getting off on a little bit of a rabbit trail, but the private money for election help needs to stop because it's tainted, and there is evidence, I think, that's been presented that shows how the money that came in 2020, how it was definitely sent more to certain leaning areas than others. And I really don't. And the other thing too is that we need to add the legislation that was in 221. We need to get it back in because there are a lot of things that really need to be addressed that were in that legislation, and that would probably save some money too. Thank you all very much. I appreciate you letting me speak.
Thank you for your testimony. Let's see. Ann Gray Herring, Common Cause.
Have to lower that. My name is Ann Gray Herring. I'm the policy analyst for Common Cause Georgia. Our county elections offices are already overburdened and underfunded, and this bill would cut off one of the few remaining means to receive additional funding and prohibit boards of commissioners from choosing to allocate funds to their county elections offices when they identify a need. Georgia's 159 counties are of varying sizes with varying degrees of need, and the county governing authorities should have the discretion to provide additional funding as they see fit. Along that same line, a lot of reference was made to one county that received funding in this way, and it was implied that this was wrongful at the time. But this bill removes the line that a governing authority of a county can be a source of funding, and that funding was sourced by the governing authority of the county. So, with that being what's taken out, I don't see how that was counter to the law as was written at the time. And, I want to echo some of the concerns that have already been raised about Section D and that being an ex post facto law and the significant constitutional concern of that. County elections offices are in even greater need of additional funding as they struggle to keep up with the additional requirements imposed by legislation that has not been accounted for in the state budget. Their increased work should not be met with decreasing access to funding. And finally, I do agree with Senator Burns when he said that if you break Georgia law, you should be held accountable. I don't dispute that at all. That's absolutely true. But, the felony penalty in this bill is extremely harsh. There's already kind of a mechanism that exists for violations of elections code. A complaint can be made to the state elections board. They can investigate that. They can escalate it to the attorney general if they deem it warranted. And this, suffices without needing to make it a felony. This adds just another level of fear for election workers, and it's already extremely hard for counties to recruit and retain election workers. And, to have the felony penalty when, they could be just going about the course of their job and, inadvertently do something counter to this bill, they shouldn't have to operate under that fear. And I just do want to say thank you, Chairman Leverett, for allowing time for public comment on this. I know it's been a long one, but there wasn't this same opportunity in the Senate Ethics Committee, and it's important for us to be heard on this. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. I'm not known for conducting short meetings, unfortunately. Did you hold on one second? I think Representative Maynard may have a question for you.
Thank you, Chair. Common Cause has a really good website for information on elections, and it's usually the site that I would go to point people in to find who their representatives are. And my picture is the wrong picture up there. I've called so many times.
No.
It's not my picture. It used to be, and now it is not me. I would love that to be fixed.
Yeah, I don't manage the website myself, but I can contact the person that does because
I would love that.
That is very unfortunate, and I'm sorry about that.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I guess I should have characterized Representative Maynard's question as a request more than a question. So thank you. Diane Fisher.
Hi, thank you for hearing our concerns about SB 222. I am Diane Fisher, the president of the League of Women Voters of Gwinnett County, representing the League of Women Voters of Georgia. We understand the sponsors of this bill have concerns about grants accepted by local election offices to support their valuable work. We believe that barring local election boards from accepting third-party grants is a disservice to the voters and a disregard of the decision-making abilities of local communities. In Gwinnett County, during the 2020 and 2021 election cycle, which was disrupted by the pandemic, third-party grant funds allowed Board of Elections to cover the significant unexpected expense of buying personal protective equipment for poll workers and voters and paying the large number of temporary workers needed to process the influx of absentee ballots and help complete the recounts for the general election. Running elections that are safe, efficient, and meet legal requirements is expensive. If you are committed to taking away opportunities for outside funding, and we hope you are not, we believe that the state has an obligation to make sure that local election boards have adequate resources to support their needs so that they would not have to seek this outside funding. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Kristen Neighbors. All voting is local action.
Yes, thank you so much. It's Kristen Neighbors. All Voting is Local Action. We are a nonpartisan organization that advocates for policies that will improve voter access and aid counties in running smooth elections. So SB 222, reading it over, it seems to have been born out of the assumption that there was some kind of quid pro quo associated with the grants that were distributed to Georgia counties, especially in 2020. But the truth is the Center for Tech and Civic Life gave millions of grant dollars to multiple Georgia counties this year. Everyone who applied for a grant was given one, and this money came with no strings attached other than it be spent on elections. Despite the proliferation of conspiracy theories about partisan goals or outcomes of the funding, we know that it went the money went to red counties and to blue counties. Joseph Kirk from Bartow, which went 75% for President Trump in 2020, testified before Senate Ethics recently about the grant he received from this organization and how helpful it was. Representative Olalier also referenced several other counties that voted Republican and received grant funding. We know what this money pays for. It pays for PPEs, poll workers, rental space, security cameras, hazard pay, other costs related to running elections. So rather than banning these type of funds, I think more counties should honestly be applying for them. Red counties, blue counties, rural counties, urban counties. We're leaving money on the table that could be used to make Georgia elections the best in the nation and at no cost to our state budget. This outside funding doesn't affect our bottom line. We can use the state budget for other needs. Elections are expensive. Counties right now need battery replacements. I know they've been talking about the battery replacements they need and trying to get $4 million allocated for that. They need more poll pads. They need printers, scanners. They need to pay poll workers more in order to get the number of bodies they need. So as the cost of elections continue to grow, largely due to unfunded mandates from this body, it's crucial that we don't cut off the lifelines to our election officials. I know we've talked a lot about Section 42 to 44, making this a felony. I also, think we should change that section because I feel like if you're an election official and you see a grant that looks like it might pay for a lot of stuff, this seems like a good grant. First of all, you're going to have to apply for it knowing that it's going through the SCB, so you're not going to get most of that grant. Fulton's probably going to get most of that grant. Additionally, you don't really, there's been a lot of changes in the law. You're not sure where the line is. Like, you could be charged with a felony and go to prison for a year. I feel like no one's really going to keep applying for these grants. The bill would really criminalize election officials who are trying to find innovative solutions to fill the funding gap. If the bill does move, we would suggest reducing the penalty to be just like an investigation by the SCB. Someone can bring a complaint and said someone did something shady. The SCB can look into it and figure out the facts and figure out the background, as they do when they investigate every sort of complaint. Many of the folks you'll hear from today in favor of this bill are the same ones who believe there was fraud in 2020. The folks pushing these types of bills will never be satisfied. This bill won't do it. The next bill is not going to do it. Please don't penalize our hardworking election officials. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your testimony. Vasu, is it Abhiraman? Well, I had the phonetic cheat sheet here that Molly prepared for me.
I love it. Thank you, Chair Leverett, esteemed members of this committee. My name is Vasu Abhiraman. I'm Senior Policy Counsel at the ACLU of Georgia. I am also an experienced election worker in the county that shall not be named. I was born, raised, and schooled in the county that shall not be named, and proud of the work that this county has done for elections, and stand by the statements made earlier by the chair of the elections board. One thing that came up was if she's unpaid, then she's donating her time to the county, right? Is that allowed under this bill? Do we have to come up with some other interpretations about how she has a quote unquote official position, therefore we're accepting that kind of thing without remuneration, that is. I want to talk about county budgets for a second. County budgets are inconsistent. They're based on the property values largely in the county and the millage rate that's set by the county. And then they fund a bunch of different things in the county. They can decide to underfund their elections office and fund a bunch of other things, or they can decide to overfund their elections office and underfund other things. We accept that design within our system, which leads to things like, what if Amazon opened a headquarters in one of our counties? Tax receipts in that county might go up, and then they end up having more money for everything they do, including elections. So as long as we have that understanding in the law now, you wonder why you make an exemption for just this one added layer of possible inconsistency, or perhaps something that would level the playing field, the money that actually would address the already built-in inconsistency in the counties and how they raise money. One of those inconsistencies that we'd end up with this bill is that sheriff's departments can raise money directly. And in fact, the legislature blessed the idea of creating tax credits for sheriff's departments, and they accept the money directly through foundations. A list of qualified foundations was released 1 month ago by the state of Georgia. They include counties like Burke County, which is in Senator Burns' district. They include cities like Americus, Dunwoody. Again, they're receiving this money directly. And let's think about county budgets. If it all comes from the same pot, let's say someone donates to the sheriff's office, the county ends up having more money for everything because of that. If someone donates $2 million to the library system in DeKalb County, I just named it, right? If they donate $2 million to the library system, that's less money the county would need to allocate there and more they would have for other uses. It just feels very inconsistent here to pick this one function when we put it on counties that set their own millage rates, that allocate different amounts of money to their elections offices, and then have their elections offices spend it in different ways. If we're going to be honest about how counties operate and the fact that we leave elections a function of the county, we would be honest about how this is an inconsistency that doesn't make too much sense in the zero-sum game of county operations. I want to point out one specific line. I think it's a line that's meant to exempt in-kind donations and services. Lines 39 through 40 in section E, it says, it shall not apply to certain exempted donations. It says goods that have a nominal value of less than 200. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. I think we're going to run into things if we keep that language in there. For example, a number of voting locations lost power a couple of years ago, and there was talk about private industry coming in to supply generators for those locations. I think that would be above $200. So I would at least raise that limit. But what I would do is actually exempt in-kind donations and goods. I don't think that it goes towards what we need here. Here's another example. If you want a county like DeKalb or Fulton to experiment with making the days a little less long, right? Betsy Kramer, longtime poll manager, said the days were long and that's why she doesn't do it anymore. If you want them to experiment with shifts and different logistics in that way, what if a UPS or an Amazon or a Delta, places that are good at logistics, what if they wanted to, donate their time and consult and create that kind of innovation for maybe shifts for poll workers? I think that would be most probably outside the county budget, outside what the county would be willing to fund, but it leads to innovation in our system. Back to the tradition of this country with different states and laboratories of democracy, experiments with what works better. If you dry up this grant funding, you're gonna you're going to have less experiments and innovations in what will work better for our system, like shifts for poll workers. And again, as a longtime election worker who's worked at different levels, I would definitely encourage that kind of innovation. With that, I will yield for any questions.
I think you have a question, or perhaps Representative Maynard's concerned about her photo on your website again.
Thank you, Chair. I think that the speaker brings up a really good point, because on line 29 and 30, it says, and I'm thinking about the volunteers, because it says shall solicit, take, or otherwise accept from any person a service is one of them. And then it says in support of performing his or her duties. So I'm reading that directly as the election workers, the county is soliciting their services. And when they perform the service for free, it's in support of performing his or her duties. I do see where that is troublesome.
Right.
Thank you.
I appreciate the question, Representative. I'm betting that the bill sponsors would point to lines 39 through 41 and the exemptions that were created. For example, services provided by individuals without remuneration, that would cover many of these instances. But I would be careful here. I would be careful here, and I think I would use more expansive language that would exempt in-kind donations, period, whether they're goods or services. I don't think that those kinds of donations are what the intent of this bill is getting to. But again, we oppose the bill and don't think you should advance it.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Any questions for this witness? All right, thank you, sir. You don't have any. Be heard on Senate Bill 222. I think I've gone through everyone who's on the list. All right, I would like to declare just a quick recess, because Representative Olaleye was very kind to bring me this water, but that's created some problems of its own nature, which I want to elaborate on. So we'll take just about a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back for some discussion and action on the bill. Thank you. All right, why don't y'all, if y'all kind of gather on back in, we'll try to resume here. D? All right. Not really. He's had to postpone his meeting already. Well, I am going to want to hear it. All right. I'm all right.
Still, it's a 5-day drive, 5-hour drive or something.
All right, folks, let's go ahead. If you'll have a seat, we're going to resume. Representative Roberts wanted to ask a question. We're going to finish that hearing, and then I'm going to do a hearing of 129, and we'll wait and do the votes. I've had a bunch of people have to leave. Representative Bazemore had to go help someone with a car, so we're going to wait to vote until we get everybody back, but I want to go ahead and just keep the hearing moving. So, Representative Roberts, you wanted to ask a question to Legislative Council, I believe.
Thank you very much. So Senator Burns said he's not a lawyer, and I know that Mr. Morelli is, I just want your opinion on whether or not this is ex post facto and illegal on its face.
Well, no pressure there, Stuart.
He said he's been advised by lawyers, so I assume maybe you're one of them. I don't know.
The language on lines 33 through 38 could potentially have some retroactive application, which could potentially present a constitutional issue.
Said like all of us good lawyers.
Ask a lawyer a question, get a lawyer answer.
I think that's a definitely maybe, Representative Roberts.
What?
I think that's a definitely maybe.
Okay.
All right. All right. Thank you, Stuart. All right. What I'd like to do, I'm going to hold further discussion and vote on Senate Bill 222 until we get we've lost some folks to committee members and sort of a somewhat of a personal emergency, but they should be back. So I'm going to hold that one, and let's go ahead and hear 129. So, Senator Rick, if you want to go ahead and present your bill, and we've got a substitute on that too. So what I can do is if you want to go ahead and talk about your bill, and I'm going to talk about some of the provisions of the substitute, which are basically Secretary of State requested items.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Here to present Senate Bill 129. This is basically giving people the opportunity to go vote. Now in statute that someone can request and get time off up to 2 hours on election day to go vote. This just gives them the opportunity to do that during early voting, the 21 days prior. And it's a mutual agreement between the employer and the employee as to the time they're allowed to go vote. Be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. So that we're basically, there's a provision in existing law that was drafted back before we had early voting that said employers basically had to let employees go vote if the hours of employment would not allow. I think it was basically a 2-hour period when the polls were open outside of work.
Yes, so that's
and
pretty
so
much
we're
it.
expanding that to also apply to early voting days as well.
That's right. That way it would make it more convenient for the employees and the employer to allow them to go vote.
All right. I think Representative Roberts has a question.
Actually, I just want to say thank you for this bill. I think it is a great balance between the voter and the employer. And when the time is appropriate, I'm happy to make a motion, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you.
Well, thank you. Maybe we should have heard this one first.
Saved you a lot of time, wouldn't it? Sorry, I'm known for making people wait a long time for a very short presentation. Sorry about that. I do want to, for members of the committee and for you, I don't know if you've seen, there is a substitute, LC 472409S, that adds a few additional provisions that the Secretary of State's office had requested earlier that we're putting back into this bill. And I've got that substitute, and I think all the committee members have it too, and I was just going to go over that with you. And I believe we've got some folks from the Secretary of State's office here who can
There's also a
testify
letter
about
from
that.
the Georgia Chamber of Commerce endorsing my bill also in your packet.
Okay, all right, yes, and
Thank
we've
you.
got that too, thank you. So the sort of the heart of the bill is Section 3, and that's
May I have a copy of that?
yeah, do we have one we can give him?
You might get another legal question. You might need yours.
So the original bill is Section 3. That was original Senate Bill 129. We're adding in Section 1, there's a provision where we're amending 21-106. This is the section that allows for the review of systems that are having different problems. And there's a review board that was to be appointed, performance review board, and the current law says it would be local election officials. And I think there's some sort of statutory construction issues with that term because technically the board itself is an official. And so we're making it clear that members of boards of elections or boards of election and registration from other counties can also be appointed to that performance review board. I think traditionally.
So that's line 27, 28,
yes,
29,
yes,
30.
27, 28, 29, and 30, correct.
Okay, that makes sense.
Then Section 2, we're taking an amendment to 21-2-381. These are the applications for absentee ballots. The change doesn't occur until page 4 at lines 75 through 82. We're changing the language of the disclaimer that has to appear on the ballot application. So if an entity mails out a ballot application, there was some language required by 202. My understanding is that language actually was developed before certain changes were made to 202 that rendered the language not exactly directly on point. So we're changing to just language now on the application. It would have to read, this application has been distributed by, and then you would have the name and address of the organization, not by any government agency or any state or local election office, and then in all caps, this is not a ballot. Because we obviously had some confusion during years past about whether those were ballots or ballot applications. So that's we deleted 75 through 78, and we're replacing language in 79 through 82. Then further down there in lines 86 and 88, we're just, I think, basically making grammatical change. The clause starts, the disclaimer required by Division 2 of this subparagraph shall be, and then there's a few, 3 criteria, and criteria 2 and 3 began be contained, so there was a double B there, so we're just basically deleting the word be effectively. Then Section 3 again is Senator Williams' bill, the original Senate Bill 129. Section 4 has to do with, and I think some of the folks from the Secretary of State can probably explain this better, but there is a requirement in the law that the election offices begin sort of accounting for, at a certain point, for what they've counted and what is still not yet counted. And they call that the denominator, apparently. And the requirement was that had to be done by 10 o'clock. But 10 o'clock is kind of in the middle of everything, just after polls have closed. So we pushed that deadline back to 11:59 p.m. We're basically giving them an extra 2 hours because I think that would just work better logistically and would interfere less with the ongoing administration of that election. Then on Section 5, we're making some changes to 21-498, which I think came out of House Bill 316 in 2019. This required what was referred to as a pre-certification tabulation audit. And the changes here are just to make sure that it's not prior to, but after the local certification, but it's before the state certification. So they've stricken some of the language referring to some dates there, and they're also making it clear that this would apply to primary elections as well as general elections. And it's my understanding that the word pre-certification, which is stricken in line 140 after some reflection, the Secretary of State's office doesn't necessarily object to leaving that word in, and so that may be something we want to change by an amendment. And then you'll notice, so that's right there in lines 139 and 140. And then on line 158 to 166, we're striking that pilot project paragraph because it's been completed and we don't really need to keep that in code anymore. So just unlike, I suppose, the other bill, this has more just sort of mundane cleanup that's been requested by the Secretary of State's office. So does anyone on the subcommittee, the proud few that are left, have any question? We don't, but we're a subcommittee, so we'll have to have quorum. So if anyone has any questions, we can ask them of Rick, or you're welcome to ask them of me, and then we've got some folks who wish to speak to the bill too. So I don't see that you have any questions, Senator.
Thank you.
Your presentation was so good and succinct, everybody was pleased with it. Yeah, can we make copies for? Okay, why don't we see if we can let some folks have copies if you want one.
Yes, I gave them out before the meeting.
Okay, all right. All right, so we've got, let's see, where's our list? So folks that wish to speak to this bill, I'm just going back through it again. I believe Brad Carver, you want to speak to this one as well? Is Brad still here? All right, well, I see you're on there too, Mr. Kelly. Do you want to speak to it? Okay, all right. Let's see. Okay, all right. We probably won't vote for a little bit. Let's see. All right. Yeah. All right, Vasu, I'm going to try it again. Abhiraman? What do you know?
I'm Vasu Abhiraman, Senior Policy Counsel at the ACLU of Georgia. This is a pretty great bill, especially the intent of the different sections. In terms of what's added to the bill, from adding to the time off section, adding other things like the audit section and whatnot, I wanted to address one thing. Having risk limiting audits run after both the primary and the election may be a burden on elections officials, especially in areas where a primary runoff will be occurring. It's already difficult to turn around an election in just 4 weeks to make the runoff happen and get your absentee ballots out. And if there's perhaps an exemption for the areas that have a primary runoff, that might be a good idea. In terms of time off for voting, absolutely fantastic intent behind this bill, and support the expansion of time off for voting through the early vote period. There's one concern I have, and I'm going to flip in the sub to try to find the section. Yes, section 3. All right, so I'm going to point to lines 100 through 102, the part that says, provided that if the hours of work of such employee commence at least 2 hours after the opening of the polls or end 2 hours prior to the closing of the polls, then the time off shall not be available. Now, obviously, that was written when the provision only applied to Election Day. It kind of makes sense when only applied to Election Day, but it could present a doomsday scenario when you apply this language to the early vote period. You can imagine that in a 17-day early vote period with 2 Saturdays, an employer might point to this language and say, wait, you're not working on Saturday, therefore, we don't have to give you any time off. That would create a constraint through this bill where an employee who had 2 hours off on Election Day would then not get any hours off because the employer is saying, hey, Saturday's available, and that person might be working somewhere else on a Saturday. You know, I've worked with many temp workers who work nearly every day of the week in this elections game. And for them, what are they going to do in that situation, right? Work one place Monday through Thursday, another place Friday through Sunday. If you leave that language in there, which is the employer's right to say no, it could present a real problem when you expand it to early vote. So what we would suggest as an amendment is crossing those lines out. Let's cross those lines out. Let's make this a clean right to take time off to vote, instead of creating a difficult possible scenario when it comes to legislative intent not matching the text of the bill with those lines applying to early vote. So that's the main concern here. I would also recommend one change that would make this bill just extra strong. Folks know that employees take time off for jury duty. We support that in Georgia. You take time off for jury duty, what does the law say? It says, it shall be unlawful for any employer or the agent to discharge, discipline, or otherwise penalize an employee because the employee is absent for jury duty. That's anti-retaliation language that would make this section just extra strong. So we would recommend that belt and suspenders type approach and just take the language that applies to jury duty, and that's in Code Section 34-1-3A. Take that language and have it apply to this section, have it apply right after the line 104. And we have that suggested amendment that we can take offline if needed. But that anti-retaliation language, making it consistent with jury duty, that would make this just an ultra strong bill that we appreciate the intent behind. Thank you. Yield for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions of this witness? I don't see that you have any. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, is Betsy Kramer still here? You wave, okay. See, I knew I'd wear you down if I stayed at this long enough. Ginger Bradshaw? Is Ms. Bradshaw here? Okay.
There we go.
All right. Sam Teasley? Sam, are you still here? There you are.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I do not plan to stay long. You explained the bill very well. First, want to thank my former colleague and my friend Rick Williams for bringing the underlying legislation. Thank you to the committee for considering the cleanup language that we've been asking for. You asked us to kind of add a little bit of color to Section 4, and basically that's on the denominator idea. And the intent with the Secretary and our office agrees with is wanting to have an idea of what ballots are out, what votes are still left to be counted, so that we don't get into a situation where, well, how many are left to be counted? And so there's not this sense that, well, they're just coming up with ballots in order to be counted later. And so the idea of the denominator rule was put in place in SB 202, which we support. However, the 10 p.m. deadline makes it difficult for counties that are actively in the process of uploading their results. This is about the time when most counties are reporting their results. And so putting it back 2 hours later allows them to go on with the regular duty of uploading the results. And after they've done their bulk on election night reporting, then they have by 11:59 to go back and come back with the denominator.
So I guess the idea is when you're in the thick of reporting the votes you've counted, you shouldn't have to stop and be distracted by reporting the votes you haven't yet counted.
Exactly, because in many cases, that question will get answered as they upload all their results. They're done most counties are done by 10 or 11 p.m. So we don't want to stop them from actually doing the reporting of elections to let us know how many votes they still have left to count.
Still have left to count. Okay. And then was I correct on line 140, the word pre-certification? What is the department's position on? Does the leaving that word in help, or does it harm, or does it cause confusion?
We are fine leaving that word in.
Okay.
But you're correct. The goal here in Section 5, we believe more audits the better, and so adding it to the primary, we think it adds a layer of transparency and hopefully more confidence in the process.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any questions of this witness? All right. Y'all are just apparently doing such a good job.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And is Natalie Crawford?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to waive at this time.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Tamara Favorito? Okay. I think we thought you did, so I'm assuming we can strike that. And how about?
We'll waive the speaking fee if you'd like.
I do support it, though. Okay. And Ms. Garland, did you wish to speak?
I don't believe so. We support the changes.
Okay. All right. Great. All right. Well, that, I think, concludes our speakers. Did anyone else wish to speak to 129? Yeah, I guess you can. We don't really have a quorum at this point. You don't really need them. I'm not sure that a motion would be effective, but if you want to go ahead and make one.
Motion do pass.
Okay, I have a motion. Does anyone want a second?
Second.
All right. What's that? Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Now you have a motion for an amendment. Mm-hmm.
The online's, I guess, starting at 100, it would end at hours, and we would remove and provided further that if the hours through to the available on line 102, those would be taken out for the reasons that Vasu from ACLU alluded to. And then I would like to add the anti-retaliation language that he suggested. If I can find it, let's see. It shall be unlawful for any employer or the agent of such employer to discharge, discipline, or otherwise penalize an employee because the employee is absent from his or her employment for the purpose of voting. Voting in an election. Period.
What was that again? It shall be unlawful. Right there. Okay. Okay. All right, so I think the language would be, it shall be unlawful for any employer or the agent of such employer to discharge, discipline, or otherwise penalize an employee because the employee is absent from his or her employment for the purpose of voting in an election. I think that's the way we're going to phrase that, just voting in an election.
And then I have one more minor.
Okay. All right, so part of the same motion.
Yes, on line 141, with respect to Vasu's concern about where we have a runoff, I would just say audits for any federal or state primary, comma, except where a runoff is required, comma, or general election. So we qualify the primary.
Okay.
Just because of the timing, it'd be impossible. Or if you have some other suggestion on how to do that, that's fine.
Yeah, is Sam still here? Get Sam back in. I'd like his opinion on that. I had a question. Okay, sure. So if you'll go over there, Representative Roberts has proposed an amendment on lines 141,
Okay.
or line 141. So I think the idea is she's trying to address the concern that was expressed about runoffs in primaries.
Right.
So
Yeah, Vasu brought up a few minutes ago.
yeah,
Correct.
yeah. So I just wanted your comment on that concern, and then if that is a concern that you share, what do you think would be the best way to address that in terms of the language?
You said you had a proposed amendment? Or you were,
I had said on line 141 after primary that you just put comma except where a runoff is required, comma, and then or move from there. But if you have some other way to
Sure.
accomplish what we're trying to accomplish, I'm not.
I appreciate that concern. Would the committee be okay if we ran that by our legal team, our general counsel, and kind of put our heads together and get back to you before I speak out of school here? Is that okay?
I guess we can leave that part of the
Or are you
amendment
trying to
till
get that
tomorrow.
done today before you get it, before
I
it's
was hoping to, but I suppose we could. I've been trying to avoid rescheduling because Chairman Anderson had to.
Well, could we make the amendment in the full committee?
Yeah, I was wondering maybe we can go ahead and just.
Right.
I could
Let us
leave-
put our heads together on that, and then we can get back to the, Mr. Chairman, we can get back to you and Chairman LaHood as well.
Okay.
And I appreciate that concern,
Absolutely.
because we care very deeply about wanting our election officials to be able to do their job and do it well, and.
It's such a quick
Yep.
turnaround.
It is a very quick turnaround,
Yeah.
yes.
So let me adjust we can go with the first two pieces of the amendment now because they aren't impacting that part. So can we go ahead and get that amendment done, and then I can make the other amendment tomorrow once we have the language.
I'm I'm a little hesitant because we don't even really have a quorum here.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Let me ask my chairman.
I think there's 5.
To it, Representative Roberts, why don't we just try to nail down what the amendments are, and let's let the full committee consider them, since I don't have votes here.
Oh, you mean nail them down before tomorrow? And
Yeah,
then,
yeah,
okay,
so
that's
just
fine.
just to confirm, what you were proposing, tell me again, you were proposing to strike the lines, was it after 2 hours on line 100, and then you would strike the remainder of the sentence?
You would strike the remainder of the sentence, so it would start back up at line 103. The employer
Okay.
still has the right to specify the hours. And then after that, you would add the anti-retaliation language that I gave you.
Okay, all right.
If you just strike it after that hours, is it necessary to add in that other language?
Which line are you talking about?
Line 100.
Yeah, so the concern expressed, Mr. Chairman, was that the language in 100 to 102 would arguably not be, could be construed in such a way as that people could be denied any time off because you have Saturday voting most places, and that is, the way the statute's structured.
If you just delete from that point, right after hours, just delete those sentences, then you've done away with the discriminatory language.
We've done away with the possibility that there could be a conflict, but in situations like this where, just like in jury duty, where the government is saying an employee gets this time off, we just want to make sure that there's also language in to protect if there was any retaliation from an employer.
Which
And I
is something that's
understand,
not
but-
currently in law. We would be adding that.
Well, but I understand, but when you're subpoenaed for jury duty, you're not subpoenaed to go vote. So don't mix them up.
Well, I think that's the policy goal. The policy goal would be to treat them equivalent because it's something that you
Correct. I mean, just because I'm subpoenaed doesn't mean my employer might not try to retaliate against me when I'm gone for a week for jury duty. So,
Yeah, then he'll answer to the judge too.
well, sometimes.
But anyway, so I think just to confirm that the desired amendment is to strike in line 100 everything beginning with the semicolon after hours all the way down to the end of line 102.
Correct.
And then to add language from the what I'll refer to, I guess, as the jury duty statute, just saying it's unlawful for any employer or the agent of such employer to discharge, discipline, or otherwise penalize an employee because the employee is absent from his or her employment for the purpose of voting in an election. Right.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And then I think the other potential amendment was on lines 140 and 141, where we would basically exclude from the audit requirements primary runoffs.
We would preclude, or we would exclude if a runoff was required that you have to do the risk limiting audit because there's just not enough time.
Okay.
Yeah. Did you find it? Oh, thank you.
And I think you very capably had a amendment. I thought it seemed just a bit clunky, and I thought we might want to try to work on the
I
language.
said, if y'all got better, I agree.
And what was it was election unless? what was the
Except
one?
where a runoff is required. But I agree, I'm trying to.
Okay.
Let's see.
And I guess we'll just maybe Stuart's chiming in.
It may be cleaner to just add a sentence to the end of the
That's what I was
line
thinking.
144. The provisions of this subsection shall not apply in the event a runoff is necessary after a primary election.
Perfect.
Some such.
Yep, that's clear.
Shall not apply after, what was the rest of that, Stuart?
The provisions of this subsection shall not apply in the event a runoff is necessary after a primary election. Or a primary.
I'm sorry.
After a primary, okay. And that would just be added in line 144. Okay. All right, so we'll think we'll just send that, we won't take a vote on that one today. We'll just send that on to the full committee with those kind of amendments being considered. All right.
Thank you for the bill.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank y'all.
We miss you over in the House.
Miss y'all too, thank you.
When you came in, I wanted to say, what has brought you to this lowly state, like the old man in Christmas Story?
I was clicking my heels 3 times saying there's no place like home. There's no place like home.
Thank you. All right, folks, I hate to do this again, but I would like to have a vote on the other bill, so I'd like to just call a recess until we get some of our other members back. So if you'll hang with us about another 10 or 15 minutes, we should have them back here. We can proceed. Thank you.
You can't see us when we're sitting in the behind the speaker. Good seeing you, Kate. Yeah. Don't you hate that? They want to make some amendments on that one, but they're just called about, just 222 for waiting. I hope so with everybody here, but he clearly didn't take a vote right now.
We'll go ahead. I think we've now finally got our well, we technically don't have a quorum as a subcommittee, but we have sort of just a sort of sufficient density of people up here so we can take some action. So I think what the chair would like to do is, we did have a motion and a second on the 129 sub. We had discussed some amendments. Is this? Okay, there we go. And I think we're waiting for the Secretary of State's office to sort of confirm all of that language. So I'd like to save the amendments for tomorrow in full committee, but I would like, since we've got a motion second on that bill, I would like to go ahead and have a vote on that. So this is on the substitute to 129 LC 472409S. I've got a motion and a second do pass. Do we have any further discussion? I'd like to call that question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, like sign. So that's on to the full committee, and we've made note of the amendments, and we'll get the comments from Secretary of State on that.
Thank you, committee, and Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for your patience. Appreciate you. All right. Now back to 222. I think we've sort of finished hearing public testimony on that. We've had some discussion. Let me go ahead and just see if I can get a motion in a second, and we'll allow some more discussion. I have a motion do pass. Do I have a second? I have a second. All right, further discussion. Representative Lallier.
Thank you, Chairman. I had a amendment, if the committee sees fit to move forward with it, to strike lines 42 through 44, strike out felony to make it a misdemeanor, strike out punished by imprisonment for not less than 1 year, and make the fine, reduce it from 10,000 to 1,000 and make it not more. So strike out less on line 43 and make it more, not more than 1,000.
All right, so I'm sorry, I was looking for my copy while you
No
were
worries.
quickly going through those.
So starting on line 42, striking out felony to make it a misdemeanor. On line 43, getting rid of the language tied to imprisonment. So it would be shall constitute a misdemeanor, and
Upon conviction shall be punished by a fine.
by a fine of not more. So getting rid of less on 43, not more than 1,000.
Okay. All right, so is that's the extent of your motion to amend?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I have a motion to amend, I have a second. Any discussion? Representative Maynard.
He had the same amendment that I wanted.
Okay, all right. All right, lead counsel, Stuart, do you have
I got a question. I just missed the dollar figure.
1,000, Stuart.
Oh, I
No
missed that
more
too.
than 1,000.
I missed that too, sorry. Okay, so, all right, so we have, the amendment then would be to change the word felony to misdemeanor on line 42, to delete the words imprisonment for not less than 1 year and by on line 43. Also on line 43 to change less to more, and then change 10,000 on line 44 to 1,000. Okay, all right. I don't know that we really need a lot more discussion on that. Let me go ahead and call the question. All those in favor of the motion to amend signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no.
No.
Why don't we just have a show of hands? All those in favor? We got 3, and all opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4.
It was 4.
Oh, so it's 4-4. I vote against, so the motion fails. So now we've got the motion to do pass. All those in favor of the motion to pass the bill unamended signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, like sign.
No.
I expect we've got a split again. Let's have the ayes, show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we got 4 against, and the chair votes in favor of do pass, so it passes. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for your patience today. I think that's all the business we have. We're adjourned.